Good morning. Good morning. Okay. We promised you that we'd start at 8:30, and it's 8:30. So thank you all for getting here, waking up, arriving on time. That's excellent. That's what we tell our scholars and interns. So just for those of you who did not hear me say this last night, the idea behind the Saturday Symposium is that in the past we had returning scholars initially, because we didn't have interns, making 10-minute presentations in the evening on film, which you'll have that this evening, but we never gave them a chance to actually talk about their year and how they spent it and where they're going in life in general. So, say again? Louder? Okay, here we are. So, is that better? Okay, good. Not having the opportunity to really have everyone hear what the scholars and interns, as we grew, talk about their year and what their visions are, I created the Saturday Morning Symposium, which started in my office here in Manhattan. And it was kind of crowded. We all sort of stuck in and went for several hours doing that. So we are now in this wonderful venue. And I must tell you that I can't see you because this light is directly in my eyes. So please know that when the scholars and interns are up here, they can't see you either. So applaud for them so that they know you're there. And so without further ado, this morning I'd like to start off with Phoebe. Where is Phoebe? Are you here? Phoebe? Okay, come. I can't see anybody. Phoebe Cherney is the returning AAUS. For those who don't know what that means, it's the American Academy of Underwater Sciences. Mitchell intern. And Phoebe, come on up. There you are.
I know. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to come up. Oh, wow. Yeah, you really can't see. All right, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, awesome. Let's get this show on the road. So hi, I'm Phoebe. So a little bit about me. I grew up in coastal Maine, and so that's kind of gonna be my personality in this presentation today. But I just finished my senior year at Maine Maritime Academy studying marine biology. And so there's, wrong side of the pointer. There we go. And so I am going to have a fifth year next year where I am studying small vessel operations. So upon graduation of my fifth year, I will graduate with a 200-ton U.S. Coast Guard's license. And thank you. But yeah, so just to highlight, this is some of my classmates, very small class. These are me and my roommates. Me and my family, they're somewhere out there, I can't see. But yeah, so most of my scientific diving has actually been out in the Pacific Northwest in Washington. So 2 summers ago, I was a scientific diver in training at Rosario Beach Marine Lab studying octopuses. So this internship was really important to me to be able to finally bring the scientific diving back home. So for those of you who don't know where Maine is, we're right here in New York. Here's the great state of Maine. But yeah, so this is where I grew up. This is where I go to school in Castine, Maine. And then this is where my internship was in East Boothbay, Maine. And each of these little kelps along the coast are some of our dive sites that me and my lab worked at this past summer. And so for many of you, you may not know, but the Gulf of Maine is actually warming faster than 96% faster than the rest of the world's oceans. And so this is really detrimental to a lot of our commercially important species in the Gulf of Maine. And what a lot of people also do not realize is that we have kelp forest up and down our coast, very similar to the Pacific Northwest. But warming and these prolonged heat waves that we've been having are really detrimental to this cold water species. And so here's an example of, a kelp forest. And when warming is occurring and these kelp are dying off, it becomes bare rock. And when it becomes bare rock, it leads to these little red filamentous algae. They kind of attach, and then it prohibits any of the kelp from settling and growing again in these in these spots. And kelp and red algae are, quite different in their structure. So kelp forests are, very charismatic, large megafauna that provide important structure for those commercially important juvenile species. And then when it becomes turf reef, it's a lot harder for those juveniles to seek refuge in these areas. And so this is what a kelp forest looks like in northern Maine, and you're like, Phoebe, what is that? That's just a picture of kelp. But here's me in that same kelp forest, so very large and lush, but this is what it looks like when it becomes dominated by red algae. So this is at a southern Maine site, and again, with that bare rock, what also settles in are blue mussels, and it increases decreases the likelihood of kelp being able to reform in these areas. And so this summer, I worked with Dr. Doug Rasher at Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Sciences in East Boothbay, Maine. So here's Doug. But I also worked very closely with Dara and Shane this summer. And so Shane was actually a prior AAUS intern for the Scholarship Society, and they're in here somewhere. But yeah, so Rasher Labs study focused on species on the move in Gulf of Maine kelp forests. And what they were trying to do is look at how there's changes of distribution in these species, so kind of what native species are moving out and what species are moving in to fill those niches and gaps. And they also were working on modeling projects. But what we mostly did this summer was traditional underwater ecological surveys using scuba diving. And we also did some new and upcoming technology that I'll dive more into later. But I'm gonna start off with what we did on a typical dive day. So Rasher Labs used, traditional underwater sampling surveys, so it included roving fish surveys for adult fish, juvenile fish swath surveys, quadrat surveys for percent cover of algae and kelp, and invertebrates, and then also biomass collection. And then we also collected some water samples as well. So how a typical dive day went is, drop off the boat, head out, and then we'd start by laying out transects. And so this is a pollock that, believe it or not, is probably only 10 feet away from me. And there's another one right there. So visibility is pretty great in Maine. But yeah, so we'd start out by counting those adult fish, and we'd keep swimming. And at the same time, I would be collecting water samples, which I'll get, again, more into later. And then once we did all the adult roving fish surveys, we would move into the juvenile side of stuff. So we would, this is actually a picture of Dara right here, and she's got her little swath stick. And we'd push it along the understory of the kelp and the algae, and we'd count all the little baby fish, and we'd estimate their size and then record it on a data sheet. Of course, had to include the charismatic Maine lobster. But yeah, and then once we did all that, we'd go up for our surface interval, and then we'd begin our second dive of the day, which included biomass and percent cover of the big charismatic kelps and algae, and then of course the red algae understory and some of the other filamentous algae. So here's Shane doing his work, doing percent cover, and then I'd go through and we'd collect all of it and stuff it in bags, and then we would get ready to head to the lab. And so here's a video of what it looks like in a northern Maine kelp forest. So you can see those syringes on my side. Those are for water collection. Again, visibility is awesome in the state of Maine. But yeah, so just a little tidbit. And so once we got back to the lab, we would begin algae sorting and identification. And so first, we would remove all of the big charismatic kelps and algae. So this is agarum, which is a type of brown algae. And so once all that was left, all that was removed, we were kind of left with this soup. And this was really scary at first because I was like, all of this looks the same. I couldn't really tell the difference. I had very novice phycology identification skills. And eventually, towards the end of the summer, I was able to confidently identify the majority of the filamentous algae using a microscope or just looking at it with my eye. And this became really important because this is actually one of our main invasive algae species in the state of Maine. So it's Dasyphonia japonica, or DJ. And this is the red turf algae that you saw in the picture before. So this is kind of what is taking over when these guys are gone. And so what we weren't doing when we were diving is we were doing molecular work. So I got a lot of lab experience also this summer, which was extremely important to me because I didn't have a lot of experience doing stuff in the lab or molecular work in the lab during my undergraduate. And so, sorry. So what we were doing was working with eDNA, or environmental DNA. And so what that involves is when we were taking those water samples, they can actually be used for like kind of as a forensics tool. So when you collect a water sample from the water, you know, fish, they leave a lot of cells behind, mucus, and all of that jazz. And so when that is in the water, you can actually extract the DNA from one of those samples. And that's kind of essentially what we were doing here. And that's really important to couple with our traditional underwater ecological surveys, because it was allowed us to look into what we couldn't necessarily see when we were on our dives. So if there were any, you know, new species that were coming through other than like the typical like 5 fish that we often saw in the water. So this is a really important tool to be able to use coupled with traditional survey methods. And so what we would do, we would use this filter rig system, and we'd pour the water in, and then it would all get stuck on a little piece of filter paper. And once it was on the filter paper, then we could save it for further analysis and extract it at a later date. And so once we were actually in the lab and we began the molecular work, the idea of using eDNA for Rasher Labs was really important because they were looking at fish biodiversity, and they kind of wanted to know if the species distribution of fish were different in those northern kelpie forests compared to the southern Maine red algae turf-dominated sites. And so how we answer this question is we began with a qPCR, which is just a PCR, which is a polymerase chain reaction. And essentially what PCR does is it takes a small amount of DNA and then amplifies it into a lot of copies of DNA, which we can then use to extract and analyze for presence of fish. And so once we do that, we begin a gel electrophoresis, which is what you can kind of see on here. So this is a gel rig, and that's me filling a gel. And essentially the purpose of a gel is that the DNA will be moved down by these electrical charges at different rates, and then it forms these bands. So this is just kind of to double check that we actually had presence of fish in our sample and we extracted it correctly. And so this is an example of a gel. So those are the bands at the bottom. And so that just, you know, gives us the okay that, yeah, there was fish present in our sample and we did the first extraction correctly. And then we used a qubit just to kind of quantify the amount of DNA that was actually in the sample. And then we send all of our samples out to a company where they actually put them into a big database, and they do something called metabarcoding. So they will actually tell us what fish species were present in our samples. And so, again, this was like the summer of Be Real, so this is an unstaged photo of what molecular work really looks like in the lab. And so this is kind of preliminary findings of Rasher Labs, and essentially what this is just showing is that we were seeing, despite only seeing a few species of fish, there's actually quite a few species of fish that were present at each of our sampling sites. And so although this isn't necessarily quantitative data like we get with underwater surveys, it's more qualitative and supports further findings. But so what's next for me? This summer I'm completing a co-op, and you guessed it, I'm in Maine working at Casco Bay Lines. And I just really want to emphasize that this internship was extremely important to me and really drove me to realizing that science is my main passion. and that I would I love boats, but I would love to continue doing underwater science and couple it with molecular work in my future, potentially in grad school. So I just want to say thank you to the Scholarship Society, volunteers and staff, as well as American Academy of Underwater Sciences, and of course, Bigelow Lab for Ocean Sciences. Thank you.
Dara and Shane, are you there? Go on, you stand up and just everybody wave at him. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Okay. And Phoebe, if you really think that the visibility off the coast of Maine is interesting, I'll take you on a dive in the East River. Thank you.
That's true.
The quality of what's going on here is incredible. Anyway, Lauren Bullock, who is the intern from Reef, can't be here today. She's in the field, so we have her video to show you. Oscar and Ed.
Hi everyone, I'm Lauren and I'm the Our World's Underwater Scholarship Society 2022 Dr. Jamie L. King Reef Marine Conservation Intern. I'm so sad that I can't be with all of you in person at New York City this weekend. However, I just graduated from Clemson University with my bachelor's this past May and I'm currently in Spain for a little celebration. After graduating this next year, I'm excited to take a gap year before applying to grad schools where I want to study marine conservation. And a big part of the reason why I want to continue in this field is because of this internship. So I'm so excited to tell you all about my experience with Reef from this summer. Reef headquarters is just this little building up in that corner, and it's located in Key Largo in the beautiful Florida Keys. I was already familiar with the Florida Keys because the previous summer, I spent there with my research lab from Clemson, where we did fields collection on the coral reefs a little bit further south. However, I wasn't really familiar with Reef and still wasn't really sure when I came to start my summer. So if you're not familiar with Reef and what they do either, don't worry because I'll break it all down. Reef's official mission is to protect marine life through engaging the public with citizen science education and partnerships with the scientific community. But if you ask around the Florida Keys about what we do, a lot of people call us the people who count fish, and they are not exactly wrong. Reef's flagship program is the Volunteer Fish Survey Project, which has created one of the biggest marine life databases worldwide. It's a citizen science effort, so it runs off of volunteer snorkelers and divers, and we're pretty easy to spot with our bright yellow slates in the water. As a marine conservation intern, one of my main duties was leading the education programs at Reef, and the most common one I did was giving these fish ID presentations, going over the most common fish you'll see in the Florida Keys. The groups that I worked with vary pretty widely from age and experience, but a lot of the groups were what I guess you could call novice level knowledge as far as marine life, so it was really exciting to bring them into this world. The best parts, though, were when we got to take them on a survey dive after the class, and I got to see them firsthand how enthusiastic they would get about seeing the different fish that we had just went over in class. And after, we could debrief on the boat and they would tell me about all the different fish they saw, and they knew it was a queen angelfish because it had a crown on its head. My favorite group by far to work with, though, was Camp Open Seas, which is a therapeutic scuba institute. The group was made of 3 kids, as well as the women who ran the organization, who were all in wheelchairs, and each of them had a volunteer, 3 volunteers to help them in the water and be able to dive. It was really inspiring to see all these volunteers come together, including Scuba Steve, who you see up there in that corner, and he did dive in the Santa Scoop. And to make this experience possible for them, especially because even so many able people will never experience diving in their lifetime. And I was really honored to have made this experience more enriching for them through surveying, which they did really enjoy. They were probably my most engaged group of surveyors, and even though there were a lot of challenges with getting them in the water and diving and a lot going on, they were still able to keep track of their slate and pencil and record all the different fish that they saw. And of course, between my classes, I tried to survey as much as myself as I possibly could, and I was grateful to have really awesome survey buddies with me in my fellow interns, including Kayla, Grace, and Alyssa, as well as our education fellow, Maddie, who, and that picture on the top there is actually us going on our first survey dive ever, which feels so long ago now. It was so amazing to see all the beautiful creatures on the Florida Keys coral reefs and to be able to really know what they are, see which ones were most common, and to be able to look for those ones that you don't normally see. But even those times we couldn't get on a boat, my fellow interns were always ready to even go snorkeling in the mangroves with me. And so it was always just a lot of fun. However, reef surveying happens worldwide, not just in the Florida Keys. And one of my favorite sites was actually up a little further in Florida at Blue Heron Bridge, which is in West Palm Beach. It's a shore dive, so you can just walk in with your equipment. And at first, it doesn't look like much. It's a seagrass habitat, but if you're patient and look closely, you can see some of the funkiest creatures. We had one of our staff members who goes by Moose come with us. And so she was able to point a lot out to me and help with the identification process, which is very helpful because I had never seen anything that looked like a buffalo chunkfish or a flying grenard before, but they were very cool. By the end of the summer, I'm proud to become an expert surveyor, which is level 4 out of 5 in the tropical Western Atlantic region. I was the only intern in my group to reach this level, and it required having over 35 dives and taking a 100-level quiz to be able to know the difference between all the different scobies, blennies, and parrotfish that are out there in the region. One of the great things about the Florida Key, about reef, is that you can keep track of your surveys through their database. So I was able to see how many surveys I've done this summer, how many species I saw, and how many different sites. And I'm happy to say that since the summer, these numbers have since gone up as I've continued surveying after my time with reef. And that's because surveying really did truly change how I saw diving. Through it, I felt I was able to connect so much more with the underwater world and the organisms that live there, and really feel like I'm able to give back, as well as having the fun of it being kind of a scavenger hunt. And because I'm so passionate about doing myself, it just made it so much more enjoyable to teach others how to survey as well and get more people involved with this project. But reef does a lot more to protect biodiversity than just counting fish. Another way that they do that is through the invasive species program, which focuses on lionfish, which is invasive to the Caribbean. It was really inspiring to see how successful reef had been with this project. And one of the biggest reasons that they have been so successful is because they engage the community at every step of the way. I found that when talking to people, they really want to engage and help this problem that's happening in their own backyard, but they need to know about it to be able to help. And so that's why during my time there, I wanted to create a social media series that was focused on reef invasive species Facebook page, where once a week I would post a different infographic that are featured here on how people can get involved. So 2 big ways that you can get involved with helping the lionfish problem is to incentivize removals that can happen all year round. So one way is to encourage people to eat lionfish because they are venomous, not poisonous, so you can eat them. And they are delicious. And as well as being delicious, they're also really beautiful in their fins and tails and things. And so you can actually make lionfish jewelry with them. And so we would have lionfish jewelry workshops open to the public to do that. I actually wore my own lionfish necklace all summer before it sadly broke. But people would always compliment on it, and then just gave me another opportunity to talk about the invasive species program in my daily life. Next up, there's also the actual act of removing it. In addition to 2 big derbies that reef hosts every year, you can spear or net them all year long. And then finally, for one of the most important and also the easiest way to help with the lionfish problem is to just stay up to date and informed about what research projects are going on and what progress is being made. And we would do this through tabling events, which could be outside the local brewery or dive shop, and just being able to talk to people. One of the big research projects currently undergoing at reef is deep sea lionfish traps. So lionfish can live up to 1,000 feet deep. So at that point, it doesn't really become practical for recreational divers to be able to spear them, and traps are a lot more effective. So reef is currently helping to design these traps and testing them. They get sent down to the bottom where they're open with a fish attraction device in the middle. And when you want to pull it back up, it closes like a purse. I was able to get involved in every step of this process, including making traps, such as bending the ray bar, seeing the trap deployed, as well as going on a trap removal dive. one good summer morning. Along with all the amazing work I was able to do with Reef, I was also able to take advantage of the different conservation organizations that are happening all throughout the Florida Keys. I helped fragment coral with Moat Marine Lab, as well as transplant coral and sponge with Eye Care, which is a coral restoration nonprofit. Doing this was really amazing, especially as I'm graduating and seeing where exactly in the field I want to go to be able to experience these different types of opportunities. I also was able to spend some time with my research lab from Clemson that I mentioned earlier. And on the weekends that I didn't have a Reef event, I would drive 40 minutes south to do some data collection for my undergraduate honors thesis. While doing that, I was able to put a lot of my fish identification skills to work as my project focused on assessing biodiversity and the different type of fish that frequent around decaying derelict lobster traps. I also got as much diving possible in as I could, and I'm very grateful that the local dive shops allowed us to dive with them for free. One of my favorite dives was my first wreck dive, which was done at the Spiegel, and I had never seen anything like it before, and it was so cool to get to see it, even though the current was pretty killer and I did lose my snorkel on that dive. I also got my rescue dive certification, which, along with being really knowledgeable in making me become a more confident and self-reliable diver, but it was also definitely the most fun certification I've done. I am really excited in this next year to continue to grow my dive skills, to be able to experience more places like wreck dives, as well as to continue to be able to give back to marine science. And so I'm excited to be doing that this summer with, you're getting my dive master internship with an organization called Marine Conservation Philippines. I'm particularly excited to work with this organization because they do focus on surveying and marine conservation, as well as connecting with the local communities. And of course, I'm very excited to continue to survey in a completely different part of the world. So I wish I could go into everything that I did this summer. Every week was different between the different classes that we taught kids. We dissected lionfish. Then there was so much community outreach and getting to meet so many different types of people through trivia at the brewery or our social event that we would have at headquarters with Fish and Friends, where different speakers would come. But overall, it was just an amazing summer that I learned so much more than, as well as teaching myself. And it really made me realize the importance of education and getting the public involved. And it's something that I want to carry with me throughout the rest of my career, and help people become as passionate as I am, as I'm sure all of you are as well. Finally, I would like to give a huge thank you to everyone at Our World's Underwater Scholarship Society and Reef who made this internship possible and as amazing as it was. Thank you to Steve Barnett for helping me put together this presentation so I can still talk to you all, even though I won't be there, as well as Claire Mulaney, who's my Reef internship coordinator and made everything go smoothly through getting there and throughout my time and getting my blog posts up. And of course, to Maureen and Melissa, who helped me prepare this presentation for you all. I'd also like to thank the people at Reef, including the remote staff, because although they weren't here in person, they were always just a Slack call away. Then, of course, all the in-person staff who made every day fun and interesting at the office and always wanted to get the interns as involved as possible and get everything we wanted out of this experience. As well as specifically the fellows, Maddie and Summer, who were always there if I had needed someone to talk to. And finally, my fellow interns, Kayla, Grace, and Alyssa, who really made the experience what it was. So again, thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but I will be in there for the tail end of Oceans Week in New York City, so I hope to see some of you then.
Okay, a public service announcement. The photo of the three people holding the lionfish, don't do that. For those of you in the room who have been with lionfish, unless you really know what you're doing, do not pick up a lionfish. Also, you'll notice that many of our internships are named after an individual. In this case, it was Dr. Jamie King. The people we've named internships after are not only luminaries and legendary in the diving world. They were incredibly important to the society over a long period of time. So as we go through this process, I'll highlight who those people are. In this case, it was Dr. Jamie King. Okay, next up, we have our returning scholar, Millie Mannering, from Australasia Scholarship. Millie?
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Aotearoa toku kāinga, ko Aoraki toku maunga. Ko Waimakariri toku awa, ko Mannering te whānau. Ko Millie Mannering toku ingoa. E huri aho no Aotearoa. Good morning, everyone. Oh, this, okay. Oh. Thank you so much for having me here this morning. It's such an honor and a privilege to be standing in front of you all today, get to share a bit more about my background, my motivations, and my learnings from this scholarship year. I just shared with you my pipiha, an introduction in Te Reo Māori, which is the traditional introduction, and it includes my family, my people, my places, and what's really important to me and make me who I am today. My pipiha introduces my mountain and my rivers, key things that build up the identity of a New Zealander, and it's really special to share that with you this morning. This is me standing in my backyard. I was pretty lucky. I had an upbringing filled with adventure, and I was scrambling around the mountaintops, swimming in the alpine lakes, and this really instilled a strong sense of how important the environment is. This is a value that I carry throughout everything I do, which is good. Oh, is there a clicker? Green button, nice. As you can see in New Zealand, the ocean is always very close to the mountains. And once I discovered the underwater world, I was pretty captivated. This is actually one of the first times breathing underwater. And as you can see, the visibility isn't very good. It's freezing cold, and it's very strong currents and swell in the bottom of the south of New Zealand. But I was absolutely hooked. You can probably tell by the double enthusiastic thumbs up. I actually discovered scuba diving while I was studying zoology at university, and I continued on to pursue a Master of Science in Marine Science. I found that diving was this perfect tool to combine with my research interests. It's pretty awesome that you can put on a mask, put on some fins, dive into the ocean, and immerse yourself in the environment and actually see what you're studying. I continued on to work as a scientific diver for government agencies, environmental consultancies, and my university. I was pretty stoked on diving, and I was keen to see just where it might take me. If you could tell younger Millie the journey I've been on, she would not believe it. Over the past year, I've had the opportunity to travel to parts of the world that I could never have imagined and work with the most incredible, passionate, and inspiring people. I'll get into that a little bit more into depth in my presentation, but first I just want to acknowledge what an incredible year this has been for self-exploration. It's not often that you get a whole year to explore a variety of your interests in the underwater world and get to collaborate with such a diverse range of people. The opportunities I've had this year have just broadened my horizons, changed what I thought was possible in marine science, exploration, and diving, and it's just been incredible. There's definitely been some challenges, some great learning opportunities, and as a result, this year has been one of huge personal growth. Very limited time to talk about the most jam-packed year of my life, so let's get started. Training and developing my skill set was one of my big priorities for the year. As an eager beaver university student, I had a lot of enthusiasm, but I'd only ever dived on a tank of air, and I honestly didn't really think there were many more options. Looking at this list here, it's pretty remarkable to stand here today and say that I'm a technical diver, I know how to manage multiple stages underwater, multiple configurations, and even have gained my closed circuit rebreather, 45-meter decompression diving certification on heliotrox diluent. I even trained with the incredible Kurt Kroc and gained my PFI intermediate freediver qualification and managed to hold my breath for nearly 4 minutes underwater. I never would have thought that was possible. Behind these logos are a huge amount of people that have given me the opportunity, time, a huge amount of patience and enthusiasm to train me, and without them, this would have been possible. So what exactly was I training for? Well, I wanted to build my capacity as a diver, my competency in the field, and supporting different research projects. I also wanted to investigate future research pathways. As a result, I collaborated with a wide range of research institutes and organisations around the world. I dived under the Santa Monica Pier with Kerry Nichols, looking at underwater observatory platforms, ocean monitoring observatory platforms. I also managed to investigate seaweed biodiversity in the Arctic. The diversity of research was incredible. I dived with great white sharks in the wild and helped to tag them to better understand their unknown lives. It wasn't just research that I was interested in. I also wanted to work with people that are capturing the ocean, sharing stories and communicating this underwater world with other people. I wanted to learn about underwater resource management and how this changes around the world. You might look at this list and think, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory? Millie, how does this fit in? Well, I met with an aerospace engineer, and it turns out space technology is a fantastic way to understand more about our oceans. Through satellite tracking, you can actually track movement of water across the globe through gravitational abnormalities. You can also use incredible robots to explore under ice, underwater environments and collect samples. How incredible. I initially created 532 slides to go into depth on all of these experiences, but after a stern conversation with Maureen, I have presented a condensed version for you this morning. I present to you my year in review. I sailed the 7 seas in the symbolic sense and quite literally dived in all 7 major oceanic bodies of water. I collaborated with organisations and institutes around the globe, from the tropics to the polar regions. I think that in itself is a huge giveaway to the amount of people that have helped me out and supported me throughout this year. I've met so many kind and generous people who, without this, would not have been possible. Many of you which are here tonight, which is very special. I also saw 15 species of penguins, which is insane. I also free-dived with a 1,500 kilogram elephant seal. That's a good story, but I'll save that for later. During my scholarship year, and as a marine ecologist, I also witnessed major change in the underwater ecosystems. So this is in Fiordland in New Zealand, and during some seaweed surveys, I noticed all of these white spots on the seafloor. Our dive team we had just discovered the world's greatest sponge bleaching event ever recorded. So these sponges go from this beautiful brown colour to stark white. They release their symbionts in times of stress, like heat stress, very similar to coral bleaching. We were diving in the middle of a marine heat wave with the highest temperatures ever recorded in the region, and this resulted in the bleaching of millions of sponges. I also witnessed major ecological change and saw the impacts of sea ice loss. This is an image I took in the Weddell Sea in Antarctica, and during this past year, sea ice has been recorded at the lowest extent in history. This has major impacts, not just for iconic species like the very adorable emperor penguin, but it also has major impacts on the oceanic global circulation system, how water is moved around our planet. As many of you know, as people involved in the marine world or outdoor enthusiasts, as soon as you start seeing these major environmental changes, it can be pretty overwhelming. But luckily enough, through the people I've met during this year, I've gained a great sense of hope. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The people have been the biggest impact my scholarship year has had on me. So many of you have been so kind to me. You've shared your stories, you've shared your connection to the ocean, you've shared how your work contributes to how you want the ocean to look in the future. That has had such an impact with me, and I'm so grateful for that. I want to expand a bit more on this idea of hope and how I gained it. Through these 4 major sections, I actually was able to be given hope throughout the year. Through people in the community, protection and restoration, the power of technology, as well as the power of exploration. I'm going to share a few stories on each of these 4 sections, and in the hope of doing so, that they can also provide you with some hope. I gained hope through the power of people and community, witnessing how interconnected people can be to the ocean and projects that support this. You're probably looking at this picture and thinking, what is that massive rock wall? Well, this is actually the first modern clam garden to be built in the USA. I joined the Swinomish Indian tribal community to help build this wall. We moved 33 tons of rock to create this wall, which is a lot of rocks. Clam gardening is an ancient form of aquaculture that's been used for thousands of years. What happens is when you build this rock wall, sediment gets trapped on the intertidal area and it creates this optimal habitat for shellfish. It also supports other life like octopus, sea urchins and snails. It really becomes this thriving sea garden. Similar to the gardens on land, I learned from traditional knowledge holders about the importance of looking after the garden. Through digging in the sediment, removing rocks and algae, and returning in crushed up shells, you can actually improve sediment conditions and optimize recruitment. How insane is that? It's been happening for thousands of years. It was such an honor and a privilege to be included in this remarkably sacred day, and it's had such an impact on me. I also gained a lot of hope through a community in the high Arctic. Traveling to Iqaluit or Cambridge Bay, I honestly thought it was in the middle of nowhere. I traveled for days and flying through the aurora-filled skies over this expansive tundra, I finally arrived in this community in the far north. Hosted by Canadian High Arctic Research Station, I was involved in a variety of different projects. So here I am, preserving some seaweed for an investigation into seaweed biodiversity in the area, as well as joining the Canadian High Arctic Research Station dive team for some extremely chilly diving. The greatest impact I had was actually on the people in the community and learning how deep this connection to the environment really is. Working with local organisations like the hunting and trapping organisations, as well as making friends in the community, I realised about the depth of this connection to the ocean. One of my most special memories is visiting this back room of the library where the elders would meet daily to sew. They made the most beautiful garments and jewelries out of different animal products like seal skin, and I would come and share some sea urchin or kinna from our scientific dives. I learned about traditional foods like caribou and Arctic char, and it was such a special time. When you live this interconnected to the environment, your way of life and your culture are greatly impacted by change. The high Arctic is warming 3 to 4 times faster than anywhere else on the planet. That's having huge impact on this community. The sea ice is getting much thinner and it's lasting much less throughout the year. This is impacting things like animal migration, food security, as well as how people can safely safely move between different communities across the sea ice. I worked with Ocean Networks Canada that were working to understand these changes. They have a community-led observatory in Cambridge Bay, and it includes this platform. This platform is rigged with some really cool scientific instruments that understand what's happening biologically, chemically, and physically in the bay. It even has a special instrument on it called a sea ice profiler to understand sea ice thickness. The data, me in the corner helping wrap some cables up, but the cables make sure that the data is uploaded in real time to the internet to be accessed by anyone, anywhere. The idea of a community-led observatory means that this data can be combined with traditional knowledge to understand the functioning of the bay and how this is changing. It was pretty inspiring to see Ocean Networks Canada's role to make this data accessible, relevant, and useful for Indigenous and coastal communities throughout Canada, and in doing so, support their needs and research interests. From my time in Swinomish and in Ikalaktuutiak, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional landowners for welcoming me so generously. I also gained a lot of hope through the power of protection and restoration, seeing what's actually possible in the rewilding of our planet. This is the most smelly and noisy scene that you could ever imagine. Not only did this have a major impact on my nostrils, but also on me because it was so incredible. It's a macaroni penguin colony in the sub-Antarctic islands. And the productivity of this area is not just because of how underwater resources are managed through marine protected areas, but it also relies hugely on how the land is managed. I joined heritage expeditions to work as an expedition guide in the area. The sub-Antarctic islands are a small group of remote wild islands in the south of New Zealand. They are incredibly wild. There's lots of endemic, endangered species like these giant albatross and giant kelp forests. These islands are the definition of a success story of protection and restoration. And it was incredibly inspiring to be able to share this with the guests and the importance of these islands and their uniqueness. So what does restoration mean in New Zealand? Well, unfortunately, it means killing things. A lot of our endemic fauna have evolved without any mammalian predators. So as ships arrived into these islands or were shipwrecked there, they offloaded a whole lot of pigs, cats, mice, and rats. And our endemic fauna are completely defenseless against them. So pigs actually eat live albatross and they destroy any kind of vegetation. This cat here, you can see, has wandered into an albatross colony and is having an absolute feast. Even the mice have a major impact, and this is a bit disturbing, but with major seasonal food availability shifts, we've documented mice going into the albatross colony and eating albatross chicks alive. These islands that have been restored and had pests taken off are huge signs of hope. For example, for these critically endangered endemic hoiho, or yellow-eyed penguin. So their population are really struggling on the mainland, but on these sub-Antarctic islands, they are thriving. There's actually one island left in the sub-Antarctics called Auckland Islands that still has pigs and cats on it. So if you're interested or have some funding and you want to talk to me afterwards, I'd be keen to chat. I also was interested in restoration of the underwater world. In Tasmania, there's been some major oceanographic conditions changing due to climate change. The waters are getting a lot warmer and a lot less nutrients. That's resulted in nearly 95% of kelp forests being lost in the last 50 years, which is devastating. I worked with Scott Bennett from the Institute of Marine and Antarctic Science, and here I am actually reseeding kelp onto the reef. This kelp is very special. It's been genetically selected for and bred in a laboratory to be tolerant to higher temperatures. Having had the opportunity to dive in incredible kelp forests off Monterey, off Catalina Island with Carl, I've discovered how incredible these kelp forest ecosystems can be. It was pretty inspiring to be involved in this restoration project off Tasmania in the hope to bring these forests back to Tasmania. I also gained a lot of hope through the power of technology, seeing how innovative ways of utilizing technology throughout conservation and research. This photo here is pretty cool. Not only is this photo one of my favorite photos taken because the fish is in focus, which is actually a huge achievement for me, but also because it was taken during a 45-meter decompression dive on closed-circuit rebreather, which, as some of you know, takes a little bit of training to get to. With closed-circuit rebreather, you don't have any noise or any bubbles, and you can approach marine life so closely. It was amazing to have this moment with this fish and its beautiful anemone home, its stalks waving in the current, and actually be able to explore the underwater world in this very unique way. I loved training with rebreather, and I found it as an incredible piece of technology to explore the underwater world. It's remarkably different to open circuit, and with that, I found a lot of different opportunities opened up. There was actually one team that are utilizing rebreather, and I was able to work with them during my scholarship year. Off a small island off the Caribbean called Guadeloupe, I joined Under the Pole, a scientific underwater exploration team. Founded by Guylain and Emmanuel Badu, I was able to live on board the small yacht Y and actually see what their team are doing. The team use rebreathers to access the mesophotic zone, and they investigate these marine animal forests down at depths around 150 meters. So they dive regularly to these depths to conduct research, collect data, and deploy instruments. It was really inspiring for me to see how rebreathers and this type of technology can be utilized to access this environment and investigate something that is very little known about it. I loved working with the team, and I also loved working with diver propulsion vehicles, DPVs or scooters. Not just used for the convenience of travel, they're also used for safety to ensure that divers at the depths of 150 meters are exerting minimal energy. But a confession, I also found them incredibly fun. I was given hope through the power of exploration, seeing how connected you can be to the environment and how through that there's such a desire to protect it. I had the opportunity to travel to Antarctica. Supported by EOS and Joe experiences, I was involved in an expedition to resupply the scientific base of NOAA on Livingston Island, as well as an expedition through the Weddell Sea and the Antarctic Peninsula. It was incredible. Here I am in a Zodiac off the coast of Elephant Island, and in operating the Zodiac, everything is so loud. There's this huge glacier, which you can't quite see in the photo, but it's a calving glacier, and it's dropping tons of ice into the ocean. It's exploding everywhere, and it's just so loud. The mountains are rising straight out of the sea, and it's just a spectacular environment. On this peninsula here is a bronze statue of Shackleton. Many of you would have heard the name Shackleton before, but Shackleton ended up with his men on Elephant Island after getting his large ship, the Endurance, stuck in pack ice and failing his trans-Antarctic expedition. It was really inspiring for me to be in the same area as Shackleton, and despite my methods of exploring in the Antarctic being very different to his, I think that the value and the meaning of exploration still remains the same. For me, Antarctica was an incredibly personal trip. I first heard of this mysterious, crazy ice-covered continent from my family. My granddad and my great-uncle worked with the New Zealand scientific base, And they, as photographers, they captured this incredible place. It was really special for me, through film photography, to capture the same iconic species, like the cute, cuddly emperor penguin, which my great uncle took almost 60 years ago to the day. I also had the opportunity to explore underwater. As you can tell from the photo, I'm quite excited. I've actually investigated in a research lab in New Zealand how changing conditions affect Antarctic species, particularly the sea star Odontesta. It was pretty cool doing this research in New Zealand, but it was incredible to actually dive in the Southern Ocean, see these species in real life, and see the spectacular colours and array of life. Having this experience, this exploration underwater, just reinforced my desire to explore, understand, and protect these areas. Now, I'm not saying that you have to stand where Shackleton stood or dive in super icy cold waters to be an explorer. And actually, all of us are explorers here today. Especially being divers, we have a unique opportunity to head into the water, and every time we do so, we're exploring. We're actually a very, very small fraction of the world that has access to do that. And with that comes a lot of responsibility. We have the responsibility to share our exploration and connect others with the underwater world. I actually come from a family of non-divers, and no one in my family has ever breathed air underwater. So it was sometimes quite tricky to explain this year of diving to my family. I found through underwater photography, I was able to share all of my stories, the incredible fish I met, like this very, very bothersome flounder off the coast of Nova Scotia, and share these stories of the underwater world, and in doing so, connect my family with them. This is a beautiful crocodile fish off the Falkland Islands, and having never operated an underwater camera before the scholarship year, I found this is such a great tool to use. Ecologically and economically important, I also found kelp forests incredibly beautiful, and I enjoyed trying to capture that beauty through photography. I also like capturing species that you wouldn't consider as underwater animals, but these incredibly curious cormorants are actually completely reliant on ocean health for their survival. This was freediving off Campbell River in the beautiful Vancouver Island, and these are salmon that are migrating upstream. These salmon are the lifeblood of the Pacific Northwest. Their ancient migration supports a huge, diverse web of life. As they come up these rivers and spawn, lay eggs, and die, their nutrients are released back into the environment and help fertilize the plants. This is the iconic definition of connection between land and sea, and was a theme that kept coming up throughout my scholarship year. Mountains to the Sea is not actually just a reflection of my journey. Descended from mountaineers and now a marine scientist, it's also a direct translation of Kiuta ki tai. Kiuta ki tai is a phrase in Te Reo Māori, and it means the interconnectedness of the environment. It refers to the journey of water, as it falls from the sky, lands in the mountains, travels across the land into the ocean. It's really important to realize that we can't view these ecosystems in isolation, and they're actually all part of a living system. Additionally, we're actually part of that living system, and as kaitiaki, or guardians, we have a responsibility to look after it. I would like to have a massive thank you to my family who really began this journey and instilled this strong sense of importance of the environment in me. Although my family and my loved ones weren't able to come today, they are 14,000 kilometres away, but they've actually been with me every step of this scholarship journey, and I'm so grateful for their support and love. I'm also extremely grateful to Rolex for what really has been the opportunity of a lifetime. This scholarship year has been remarkable and just absolutely incredible. I'd like to have a massive thank you to the Our Water Underwater Scholarship Society, the board of directors and volunteers. So many of you are in this room tonight, and I know how how tirelessly you work, how much effort is put in behind the scenes to make all of these internships and scholarships possible. And I'm so grateful for this opportunity and all the work you put in. A massive thank you to my Australasian coordinators, Stephen Andrews and Joanna Smart, for supporting me and helping me throughout the year and keeping me on track. As an eager, enthusiastic university diver, I'd only ever loaned equipment from friends or the university. So to be equipped with such incredible dive gear and underwater camera setup throughout the year meant that I could dive with any dive team in the world safely and comfortably. And so a huge thank you to my incredible equipment sponsors. This list of people have been incredibly enthusiastic and patient as they taught me so many new skills. And I'd like to have a huge thank you to the incredible training providers and dive organizations. That's a huge list. There's many organizations that have just taken me under their wing and have been so eager to share their knowledge, their work, and collaborate with me. This list of hosts have been so kind. They've opened up their homes, they've shared so much with me, more than just food. They've shared their stories, their lives, and so much hope. There's so many people behind the scenes that have made such an impact on me, and without their help and support, this would not have been possible. Through this scholarship, I've really found such a community and so much hope through all of you in diving and marine science and all of you here today. So I'm so grateful to each and every one of you for what has truly been a life-changing year. Thank you so much.
Outstanding stuff. So for those of you who keep hearing our interns and our scholars referencing Mo, Maureen, where are you? You're pretty good. No, she's not. That's not Maureen. Maureen, stand up. And wait a minute. Wait. Where's and wait a second. And Melissa Smith. Melissa, where are you? What? There she is. There she is. Okay. So Maureen and Melissa have worked tirelessly helping the interns and the scholars put their presentations together and stuff. One other person who, without his work, hundreds of hours, we would not be here. And that's the guy standing up there, Steve Barnett. So during your time together, if you see these folks, give them a pat on the back, give them a hug, something, okay? Good. And by the way, just as an operational note, we're going to take a break sometime around 10 or 10:15, so hang in there. Good. Next up, our returning intern for the Divers Alert Network, Dr. Glenn Ekstrom, Health and Safety Internship, named after Glenn Ekstrom, who was an incredible researcher and physiologist who was incredibly important to us. We lost him in the last couple of years. Alex, where are you? Alex Ballin, come on up. The microphone is yours.
Thanks so much for that introduction. Just before I get started, I want to talk a little bit more about Dr. Ekstrom, the namesake of my internship. I never met Dr. Ekstrom, but from what I've heard and read about him, he dedicated his career to all facets of diver health and safety. From training to equipment to fitness to physiology, he really did it all, and I'm honored to have been selected as one of the first interns to carry on Glenn's legacy last year, and to have had the privilege to learn from leading dive scientists at Divers Alert Network to continue Glenn's research footprint in the industry. To give a little bit more about myself, my name's Alex, as was introduced. I just graduated from my Bachelor's of Neuroscience at Western University in London, Ontario, Canada. Thank you. I'm an avid scuba diver and dive master, and I've been diving for a little more than 6 years. I started my work in the dive science community, working with Dr. Neil Pollock at the University of Laval in my first year of undergrad, and I was doing some work in nutrition and diving. Also, to be involved in my local dive community in London, I worked in gear sales and service at my local dive shop. So I have this quote here from actually one of my very first instructors when I first got certified as an open water student. If you're a diver, you need to know about Dan. And I really like this quote because I think it sums up Dan's impact on the dive industry, and it was the way that it was described to me when I first got certified back in high school. It got me really fired up and excited about the work. I know many of you have probably heard about the amazing work done by the medical, insurance, and safety services branches, but maybe not everyone knows about the industry-leading research coming out of Dan as well. And that's what got me really excited when I heard from my instructor. That night, I went back home, I did a quick search. I was so excited to see how I could get involved. There's a picture of me in high school. That would have been what I would have looked like there, super excitedly doing that search. And I was really excited to hear that they had internships, less excited to hear that you needed to be 21 to apply. But fortunately for me, I had heard about the Our World Underwater Scholarship Society later down the road in my undergrad, and there I was, 5 years down the road, packing up the truck and driving down to Dan HQ. While I was in Durham, I had the pleasure of living with some of my fellow Dan interns and OWUSS interns. Aaron is pictured there right beside me. It was really one of the first times where I was able to truly be the absolute dive nerd that I really am, and meet with like-minded people who were not only willing to talk about diving, dive science, and dive gear all hours of the night, but also found it cool. If you're ever unsure that our house was indeed full of young Dan interns, you could probably just look at our dining room, which prioritized tank storage over dining. Fortunately for you, I do not have a slide depicting the intense smell of 4 piles of dive gear recovering from multiple freshwater lake dives a week, but I'm sure that you can picture it. So speaking of lake dives and lakes, I got very well acquainted with one particular lake, which is Mystery Lake, while I was in Durham for the summer, because every Saturday I'd be out there helping out with the inter and intra-subject variability in post-dive venous gas emboli study, or affectionately known as the new bubble study. So to break down that title a little bit more, oh, the video's not playing. To break down that title a little bit more, the venous gas emboli are bubbles that can appear in the blood after a dive due to decompression. And these bubbles are detectable using multiple different methods, but we were using ultrasound imaging, and they can be used to provide a measure of decompression stress. So VGE appear at different rates in both different divers and the same diver on different days. And the reason for this variation, much like for decompression stress, is still yet to be identified, and we're trying to understand the factors for that. So we do this research essentially to understand decompression stress and VGE as a marker of that. In the future, this could hopefully lead to better and more personalized decompression algorithms. So the way that this would basically work is, as you can see in that ultrasound image here, we basically take an ultrasound image of the heart, and I'm pointing here because that's around where you'd be looking at, and we look in this 4-chamber view. Unfortunately, it was a video, but essentially what you're seeing here is a picture, and those little white flecks on the left side of the image are actually the right side, the right atrium and right ventricle of the heart. So if you're unfamiliar with ultrasound, I've got some anatomy up in the top right, but it's basically upside down and flipped. So these bubbles are somewhat correlated to the incidence of DCS based on a scale of 1 to 5. It's not a perfect correlate, but it's what we use for our research purposes. And when we were studying this, we basically had divers run the same profile over the course of 6 weeks and right around their NDLs. And for pre and post-dive measurements, we would take blood, saliva, nutritional analysis, urine analysis, and obviously the echocardiography. Some takeaways that I had from this study and working on it all weekends was that it was really awesome to be able to work as both a subject and a researcher. At the start of the summer, I had the opportunity, obviously, to learn lots about collecting data and working with human participants for physiology. But I think that you learn also quite a bit, and I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to be a participant down the road, because I think you learn about being a better researcher by being on the other side of that. I also was really impressed by the focus that Dan had on studying our diverse diver population through its sample selection. I really appreciated, especially as learning throughout my undergraduate degree, how many gaps we have in our scientific samples, specifically addressing the gaps of missing female participants, and that was a true focus of the research team at Dan. I was really impressed to see that. Finally, I was really excited to learn more about the machine learning techniques that were being used by some of our collaborators at UNC, specifically to quantify bubble scores and how we can use those methods to be able to streamline our research. Something else I remember very distinctly about Mystery Lake was the visibility, and I've got a great picture of that here. Although I probably remember it a little bit more like this. While I was at Dan, there was also lots of opportunity for continuing education. Not pictured here was the Field Research Operator Workshop, which was right at the start of my internship. It was an amazing experience to learn about all the physiological techniques that we'd be learning and using over the course of the summer. That included the echocardiography, urine analysis, cognitive testing, EKG, and many other things. It was awesome to learn from those industry experts there right at the start. We also had the opportunity to dive a little bit deeper, pun intended, into our gear, including the PSI, PCI, cylinder inspection, oxygen cleaning technician, and valve repair technician certifications. And that's pictured on the left there. On the right, we also had the opportunity while we were going through Florida to be able to stop at Dive Right headquarters and do a Dive Right regulator clinic. Up in the top image there's a picture of some of the interns and I in the research chamber and the renowned hyperbaric facility at Duke. And finally, one of the more exciting ones for me, and I know for Liam, one of the other interns there, pictured on the far left of the hyperbaric image. As dive masters, we had the opportunity to do the Dan DFA Pro First Aid for Professional Diver certification, and we got that instructor level. That was really important to both of us because it meant that we were able to bring that knowledge of first aid and diver safety back home to our local communities and teach more students. Fantastic. As I alluded to in the last slide, we didn't spend all our time in Durham. We also had the opportunity to do a bit of a field excursion out to Florida, and this was for the Harvester study, which has been going on at Dan for a little over 2 years now. The main objective of the Harvester study is to understand the impacts of hydration, fatigue, and task loading on the cognition in divers. So why were we in Florida? Well, lobster mini season is something that, if you're unfamiliar like I was, is a time in Florida when divers are allowed to collect double the amount of lobster than they're traditionally allowed to collect. And it's also before commercial fishing begins. So this drives many divers to push their limits, and spearfishing itself is already a form of task-loaded diving, which can predispose divers to injury, and this is certainly something we saw historically. So why are we trying to look at cognition? Well, by better understanding the cognitive status of divers during task-loaded diving, we could make more informed recommendations, hopefully, about safer diving in the future. This was a particular interest to me, this cognition work, because of my undergraduate background in neuroscience, and it was certainly, the one thing I will say, it was certainly a very different lab environment to the clinic and lab that I was used to back home. A full dive boat in Florida during lobster mini season certainly is the most extreme lab environment I've ever been a part of. But it was an awesome experience. So what did it actually look like? Well, we crammed ourselves basically onto nearly full lobster fishing dive boats and administered a battery of cognitive tests. I have some images here of what those cognitive tests would have looked like and the psychometrics associated with those. So for instance, visual scanning and tracking, vigilant attention, working memory, so the memory for problem solving, and sensory motor speed. You can probably see the parallels of how this would translate to safer diving and effective diving, and that's why it was of interest to us. Two other things that we looked at while we were there were fatigue scales to understand how that could mediate cognition, and then as well hydration. So for all of these, we tested them during a surface interval, and post-dive. For hydration, we used urine samples, and the urine cooler was placed conveniently next to the drinks cooler. I'm told there was a joke in there somewhere. So DEMA was another awesome experience that I got just at the tail end of my internship. And given my background as a personal trainer and my interest in preventative medicine and health, I was fortunate enough to connect with an awesome colleague. Shout out to Rhiannon Brenner there with the pink arrow, sorry. She was a colleague at Dan who was also interested in nutrition, given her background in biological anthropology. With her, I helped author a presentation that she presented wonderfully while we were at DEMA and I am now also working as a second author on a systematic review that she's leading in also nutrition and diving. It's really awesome to be able to come full circle from that first stage where I started with Dr. Pollack in my first year of undergrad doing nutrition and diving work, and now having something come to fruition that I can actually be sharing with the dive community. While I was at DMI, I also had the pleasure of attending the scholarship breakfast, where I met a few of the interns and scholars, as well as some lovely other folks from OWSS that I missed out because I wasn't here last year for New York. So this what's next for me slide is really important to me because coming into this internship, I had full intentions of continuing my education into medical school. However, while I enjoyed the physiology research and the life sciences, I found myself incredibly drawn to the ingenuity of the computer and data science techniques being used by our UNC collaborators, using machine learning to process our ultrasound images and facilitate more efficient research. I've always seen myself as a problem solver, and discoveries like my interest in medical image processing over the course of this internship, along with many other things, have really led me to my path that I'm choosing now, which is to continue learning universal techniques for problem solving to apply to the world's most pressing issues using computer science in my Master's of Computer and Information Technology at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm also excited to be continuing my work for Dan as a contractor this summer in the research department, and I'll be creating an app for some of Dan's future research endeavors to allow for cognitive testing of divers while underwater. I want to thank you all so much for listening because I was so excited to share my internship journey. And I also want to give a huge shout out to all the amazing and wonderful people at Divers Alert Network and Our World Underwater Scholarship Society that made this internship possible for me. I truly cannot express enough gratitude for how much this has impacted my future career growth. And yeah, just thank you so much.
So Alex sort of like glassed over this, but where's Carl Huggins? Carl? There, Carl, okay. So there are a number of us in the room who are Doppler technicians and actually listen to those tapes. So for those of you who have never done that, there's something called Doppler toxicity, which is that after you listen to these tapes for a period of time, you go crazy. So, so having another diving nerd with us is excellent. Thank you. Yes. Okay. We have one more presentation before we have a break. And from our returning intern from the National Park Service, Haley Shipanek. Where are you? Oh, there you are. Okay, I can't see anything because of the light.
Hello, everyone. My name is Haley Shipanek, and I'm so excited to share with you today my experience as the 2022 National Park Service intern with Our World Underwater Scholarship Society. So for those of you who don't already know, this internship provides the opportunity to join the NPS dive program across its range, anywhere from Guam to the Great Lakes. And within this is a focus on 3 core themes: natural resource monitoring, scientific imaging, and underwater archaeology. So just before I begin, I want to rewind just a second. I remember being in this auditorium last year. It was just a week after I had graduated from my master's. In that time frame, I had moved back to Canada after living in Saudi Arabia for 2.5 years. As we sat in the audience, I remember Dave Conlon was seated to my left, and we listened to Sarah Von Hoen, the 2021 intern, present her experience, and after she was done, I remember Dave was called to stand in recognition of his outstanding support of this program for over a decade. However, when he was praised for this achievement, he simply stated, I take no pride in my intern's success, I take no credit for my intern's success, just pride in their accomplishments. Let's get that clear. But anyways, this heartfelt sentiment, it really, from that moment forward, I knew I was gonna be in incredibly good hands. So my goal for this internship was to gain experience that would directly inform my future as I transitioned from graduate student to young professional. Thus far, I had gathered research experience at several different universities, but now I was wanting to experience science and diving outside of academia, I wanted to explore new environments, and I wanted to enhance my cold water dive skills. So over the course of 5 months, I traveled on a whirlwind adventure of the US from New York City to national parks in Colorado, Florida, Hawaii, American Samoa, Oregon, Newfoundland and Labrador, and finally Washington, DC. So today I just want to share a few of the unique experiences that I had that have really directly contributed to where I am today and fundamentally shifted the way that I envision my future career. So let's begin. Biscayne National Park was my introduction to the dive program. It's a heavily trafficked park just south of Miami and was a really great place to kind of get my feet wet and do my boat operator certification course. It was also where I had my first experience with coral reef outplanting in collaboration with the University of Miami. However, it was my experience with WAVES, or the Wounded Americans Veterans Experience Scuba Program, that really embodied the spirit of my time here. Over the span of a week, our all-women dive team collected and removed almost 4,000 pounds of marine debris from the environment. And after this project, several of the women left feeling empowered to go launch conservation initiatives back home. The mood on the boat was cheerful as we worked together to accomplish this task, but underwater there was certainly a heaviness. I remember spending a couple dives almost completely stationary as I sat in the shadow of recreational fishing boats that floated just overhead. And as I picked through fistful and fistful of fishing line and marine debris, I felt incredibly overwhelmed and frustrated with the state of the environment. I'm sure many of you have had experiences where your emotions have been tugged at underwater, and this was certainly one of those moments for me. So bearing in mind what we had seen this week, I started to develop a bit of a new lens that I took forward with me through this internship, and kind of mirroring a little bit what Millie said, I felt like I inherently knew that with the privilege of working underwater comes the responsibility to start the conversation on how we can protect this fragile ecosystem. So next, I traveled to Dry Tortugas National Park to join their coral disease response and monitoring team. This was my first experience coming face to face with this stony coral tissue loss disease. We spent much of our time pressing antibiotic paste onto the nooks and crannies of active lesions, and as a glimmer of hope amidst a sea of disease, you could certainly see examples of where this treatment had effectively controlled the spread of the disease. However, our work was far from done, as these corals will likely need repeat and follow-up treatments for the foreseeable future in hopes of preserving the remaining reef. And it was through my time at Dry Tortugas that I realized that, of course, in diving in these remote locations, there's certain additional safety considerations that come along with that. However, it was clear that much of the work that we were doing would be impossible without a dive program. So at this point in my journey, I kind of noticed an interest developing within me in the role of dive safety officer. And this is kind of a role that I hadn't previously considered, but in hindsight, it seems like a bit of a natural fit. So now I kind of see this as, potentially an interesting career path where you can not only advance your own dive training, but really engage in an exciting role of dive education within a research setting. So bearing in mind that I had never been to any of the places that this internship took me before, my next time, my next project was in Hawaii. And this was my first time in Hawaii, and I describe it as Fishmas, which is fish Christmas. Where's my fish? Okay, there was supposed to be fish up there. Anyways, fish Christmas, just imagine it. And this is actually a holiday that we made up during grad school. We'd go out in the Red Sea, we'd take a bunch of pictures of fish, and we'd come back to school and just totally nerd out and identify them over like a potluck and some nice meals. But Kalapapa is also the place where I received some training for preparations for much colder waters towards the end of my internship. And this peninsula of Kalapapa National Historical Site is a really spectacular location. It's largely off limits to the general public, and it served as a medical quarantine for almost 10,000 individuals until the 1970s, people that were forcefully removed from their homes and settled here and once they were diagnosed with leprosy or Hansen's disease. So on top of this really spectacular geographical and significant historical history, my time here was really shaped by the people that I met. And I remember often after field work, we'd often go sift salt out of tide pools or learn how to make coconut milk squeezed by hand or harvest fruits and veggies from the land. And it was through these activities that I started to develop a deeper connection to the land and also to the small community that still calls this park home of National Park Service employees and patients who still live there today. And it was at this point during my internship that I started to become more attuned to not only the natural resources, but the cultural and historical resources that our parks are also striving to preserve. So about halfway through my internship now, I arrived to American Samoa with momentum. I felt like I was kind of, getting the hang of this thing. I was starting to fade out of my grad school burnout and really peek into internship mode, but it took a while. We did meet our fair share of delays here, but in the wise words of Dr. Eric Brown, the National Park Service biologist on site, we were determined to keep this train wreck moving, and we managed to complete the inventory and monitoring surveys for the first time in 3 years, which they were really, really excited about. This is actually the only park that I lived in a town. So the park is actually interspersed around the main island, and subsequently these reefs have been subject to anthropogenic disturbances such as fishing, dredging, and industry development, which has had historically devastating impacts on these reefs. But now these reefs have made a remarkable recovery, and I really couldn't believe my eyes as we were swimming over reefs like these only meters away from main roads. It was truly incredible. I really had to just do a double take. And in a place where only thousands of people visit each year, compared to the millions that the reefs in Florida see, the National Park of American Samoa really sparked a renewed hope within me in the resiliency of coral reefs when given the space to breathe. So back in Hawaii, Erica Sawicki, the 2017 AAUS intern and alumni of Our World Underwater Scholarship Society, led me on a dive that only a handful of people are allowed to do each year on the wreckage of the USS Arizona. On this dive, we peered through blown up portholes and we saw furniture and personal belongings silted and frozen in time. And the significance of the 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor and the wreckage of the USS Arizona created an atmosphere unlike any other dive I'm sure you could ever find. This dive is often a highlight of the NPS internship, and it is met with a lot of envy from other NPS employees who haven't had the chance to do this dive just yet. So it was truly a very unique experience, and I'm sure many of my other NPS interns can relate. So shifting gears a little bit, we went back to the mainland, and before I arrived in Colorado, my host warned me, there's not really that much to see here. However, upon submerging below the surface, I soon realized that she meant that quite literally, as many of the interns have mentioned already, you could not see your hand in front of your face at this dive site. But I really enjoyed the challenge of diving in limited visibility as we refreshed dry suit skills and practice underwater searches. As a primarily public safety dive team, Kerr County National Recreational Area and their dive work is rarely glamorous and often quite serious, but provides a necessary service for the general public who uses this park. And it was through my time here that I kind of felt the desire to seek ways in the future to use my unique skills as a diver for not only scientific communication, but to contribute to my community in ways beyond marine ecology. So next, dry suit in hand, I went to Oregon to work with 2 NPS biologists that have over 60 years of experience diving on Crater Lake. We used their Bug Suck 3000, essentially an underwater vacuum, to survey benthic invertebrates and quantify the impact of invasive species on their endemic newt population. And it was not only the rarity of this experience that lingered with me, as only a handful of interns have been able to travel here before, but the evolving and continued desire to continue diving in more remote and even colder places. So, in what should have been my last stop, I went to Washington, D.C. to present my experience to the decision makers who hold the future of this program in their hands. I presented my own experience to divers and non-divers alike. I shared NPS highlights and goals and projects, and I was really excited to represent the National Park Service dive team and share just a small part of what they do. And lastly, for one really exciting project at the end of my internship, SRC connected me with Parks Canada and their underwater archaeology team. I was really excited to be the first intern to head up to Canada and represent NPS on my home turf. At UNESCO World Heritage Site in Red Bay, Newfoundland and Labrador, we were working on a 16th century Basque whaling station. And our project was to do a site assessment of the submerged resources, primarily focused on the presumed wreckage of the San Juan, which is a vessel that sunk in 1565 with over 1,000 barrels of whale oil on board. The original excavation took over 6 years and was actually featured on the 1985 cover of National Geographic. And in addition to being able to join a dedicated underwater archaeology project, this was also an opportunity to gain exposure to a new style of diving where we use full face masks, communication, and in the coldest water I had encountered to date. Every dive looked a bit different, whether it was flipping really heavy tires, rolling out these immense tarps over the archaeological site, or sketching the site assessment and taking pictures of exposed timbers. But as my internship came to a close, from American Samoa to Newfoundland and Labrador, I knew I had gained an incredibly well-rounded experience. So about a week after my internship ended, I sat down with Brett and Dave and they asked me, Haley, what's one thing we can do? How can we make this internship better? I quickly said, oh, that's easy. Just make it last 12 months. So at the end of this internship, or previously to this internship, I kind of saw diving as a likely bonus, not a foundation of a future career. But now I really feel empowered to elevate it to the forefront, and I'm really excited to see where the future takes me. In a nutshell, I went to 8 parks, did 80 dives, and worked with over 40 NPS divers, but these simple stats hardly capture the breadth of my experience and how it has contributed to where I am today 1 year later. So just to end off, I'd like to share a little bit about what I have been up to in the previous months after my internship. I've recently moved to Vancouver Island in British Columbia for a field-based research position with Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And as a diver with DFO, I'm really excited to explore the coastal BC and Haida Gwaii and all the islands in the region on several long-term dive monitoring surveys. I'm also currently completing my SDI Dive Master training with the local dive shop and with funding provided from the Women's Diver Hall of Fame. And it's through this course that I've realized how little I actually know about recreational diving. So it's been a really rewarding challenge to work with divers of all levels. It's also been a really great way to get to know my new home. And finally, kind of expanding on a lot of the experiences that I had during my internship, and primarily with the goal for me to seek different ways to use my skills as a diver. So, whether that's education or public safety diving and different ways like that. I am so excited to be returning to Newfoundland in Red Bay this fall as a naturalist and expedition diver with Lindblad Expeditions. I can't wait. Thank you. I'm really excited to travel the world with them and help guests connect to the underwater world. And although my time as an intern is formally over, I've quickly realized that this is certainly a beginning and not an end. Through connecting with our World Underwater Scholarship Society alumni and volunteers at events like DEMA, Woodhoff mentorship sessions, or local Explorers Club events, this group continues to keep me inspired and continue questioning my path and really cultivating an exciting career. So I just want to thank each and every one of you that was a part of this journey. I'd like to thank our World Underwater Scholarship Society and the National Park Service for investing in me in this journey, and also for volunteers and board members who have supported me. And last but not least, all of you for coming out today and learning a little bit more about my experience and welcoming in the new class of interns and scholars that we have this weekend. I'm so excited to see where this journey takes them. Thank you.
Okay, so I think this is my 35th year involved with the society, and I'm now a director emeritus, which means that they don't want me to vote anymore. So one thinks about why we do this, and the presentations that you've seen so far are why we do this. these young people, I'm old, these young people are our future. They will do their best to protect this planet and to make this all worthwhile. So for those of us who have been part of the society for extended periods of time, every time we see these young people do this, it inspires us to continue. So on that note, I'm giving you a 15-minute break. And if you bump into those people we've recognized, give them a pat on the back. Okay? Thank you.